Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, online trolls. What motivates cruel and hateful behavior online, and what or who is to blame? Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, monitoring all of your live feedback. To join the conversation, tweet her. Use the hashtag AJStream. So, Malika, this is a topic a lot of people in our online community definitely relate to.
And a lot of them deal with it. And some of them are asking, how do we combat this or control trolling without infringing on freedom of speech? Kate writes on Facebook, free speech and expression is a double-edged sword, but as with everything, we have to take the good with the bad or be forced to live in fear and silence. So for those of you at home, we want you to join the conversation. Tweet us using the hashtag AJStream.
All right, and joining us in studio is Aaron James. He's an associate professor of philosophy at the University of California, Irvine. He's written a new book that talks about why people can be such jerks in today's society. The title of his book is something we can't actually say on air, but we're going to tweet out a link for it during the show. So Aaron, welcome. We're looking forward to hearing more about real-life trolls and why their bad behavior is unfortunately seemingly growing.
Oh, thanks. Very nice to be here.
We're also looking forward to hearing from our friends in our online community who are joining us via Google Hangout from all over the world. Thanks to all you guys. And if you want to be in a Hangout just like this, just follow us on Twitter at AJStream, and we'll let you know how to be on the program. It's just another way that you can be in the stream.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I love Al Jazeera, and I'm in the stream.
Awesome, one of our smallest fans. Social media networks and online discussion forums are often the site of cruel, crude, and hurtful comments left by people who identify themselves as trolls. Their main purpose is to provoke outrage and generate attention for their exploits, which include taunting the families of the deceased on Facebook memorial pages or harassing just about anyone who uses the internet. Beyond simple internet pranks, more aggressive trolling behavior has prompted discussions on free speech and whether such bad behavior online needs to be policed. So why is trolling so popular and even glorified in some circles? And is it spreading because of the anonymity of the internet or deeper societal issues? Here to discuss is Whitney Phillips, a digital culture researcher whose work focuses on the world of online trolls. She's also a lecturer at New York University. Whitney, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So I want to start with you. This is a term that gets thrown around a lot, and depending on who you ask, the definitions vary greatly. What exactly are trolls?
Well, in a nutshell, a troll is someone who is deliberately inciting emotional distress. And they could be doing it as a kind of prank, all the way up to, as you mentioned, something really malicious like going after the friends and family of dead kids on Facebook. So really, there's a wide range of trolling behaviors and a wide spectrum of what people mean when they say that they're trolling. So that's why one of the reasons why it's difficult to kind of get to wrap your mind around the definition of trolling, because there are so many ways to go about doing it.
You're one of the few people who've actually researched the characteristics of trolls. What are some of the characteristics of them? And is it true that most of them are not women?
Well, characteristics are tricky. I mean, because the majority of trolls are, in fact, anonymous. And so it's kind of hard to make universalizing claims about a group of people whose basic information you can't verify. So that already is kind of difficult. One of the things, though, that the trolls that I have spent the most time studying are trolls who self-identify. And who consider themselves to be part of a trolling subculture. So it's not necessarily just people who are being mean on the internet. It's people who sort of take on this mantle, this nominative, and then engage in sort of similar, not similar behaviors necessarily, but they're pulling from a similar lexicon. They have similar inside jokes. They trade in what are called memes, so sort of shared cultural in-jokes. And so that is one common characteristic of subcultural trolls, namely that they are self-identifying and anonymous, and again, they are trolling as a kind of it's an identity. It's you're playing in a certain way using certain tropes and certain cultural references that then flag your behaviors as such.
And we'll get more into that vernacular in particular in a little bit. But Aaron, what motivates people to act in this manner, to intentionally violate social norms?
Well, to some extent, it's just easier to do because of anonymity and because you're not going to get caught. I mean, Plato actually talks about this idea when he imagines that people have what they call the ring of Gyges, which gives you powers of invisibility. And if people had that, had such a ring now, you wouldn't be surprised to see an increase in shoplifting, for example. But I don't think it's just. But a lot of us, on the other hand, wouldn't shoplift. We'd still do the same things we do, even if we knew we wouldn't get caught. And so, but what's interesting about the anonymous context is that. And partly because it's a more impersonal kind of domain, it's open to interpretations in different ways. So the way people often interpret it is as a form of communication, exchange of ideas, where there's the normal expectations of cooperation in any conversation. But the trolls, reinterpret the domain in a different way, in a way that's, more self-serving, such that they're, kind of entitled to say or do things that otherwise wouldn't be acceptable. So. It's partly the context and then partly a sense that, they have control or mastery over the domain and that they can set its terms and in a way so that, the expectations are that you don't take things seriously, you don't take words at face value, that if you're hurt by words, it's your fault, things like that. So that's partly what motivates, is this way of reframing the situation so that they're entitled to say things that otherwise wouldn't be okay.
Our community is chiming in on the framing of it and what constitutes what troll means. CPM on Twitter says, just be careful you don't accidentally redefine troll as someone who questions my position or values, as often happens. And Hakun says, while discussing this matter, do remember that there are degrees of trolling. Some are harmless and some are not. And with that, I want to go to our Google Plus Hangout to speak to Katie Healy, who is an Irish beauty blogger. And Katie, tell us about your experience because you've been trolled.
Well, my experience is fairly mild, which baffles me that some of the insults I have received are on the lower end of the scale. I get told, it's about my appearance, my weight, things like that, and it does affect you, but they're not as serious as some other, trolls that I've heard of, I'm quite lucky, I suppose, but it's still very hurtful, and it gives you a knock in your confidence and you feel bad.
So Whitney, do you want to pick up on the varying degrees of trolling and whether commenting on someone's appearance is, on a scale?
Yeah, it's really tricky. I mean, because on one hand, so in my work, for example, I study self-identifying trolls of the subcultural ilk. That's what I study. But I'm certainly not going to say to anyone if they feel like they've been trolled, well, you're wrong about that. That in some ways, what the troll is trying to accomplish and what the troll really is doesn't matter when you think about the impact that troll has. So whatever the troll was trying to accomplish, even if they were just trying to engage in a harmless prank, in their mind it's a harmless prank, if somebody walks away feeling traumatized, whose perspective do you defer to in that case? So it's the question of what is trolling, what is a troll, what's the spectrum? It's so complicated, and it's almost impossible to put forward a single definition that encompasses or helps explain all experiences that people have, both on the side of the troll, so the actors in these behaviors, and then the targets of these same behaviors.
Whitney, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, so what's the difference between a troll and an online stalker and an online bully? Is there a distinct difference?
I think that, so the thing about trolls, particularly trolls that self-identify that are part of the subculture or identify with the subculture, is that they often are just going after targets. It's sort of like a one-time attack. So they all kind of swarm around a certain person, and then when it gets boring, they move on to someone else. That's not always true. Sometimes trolling persists for a very, very long time and very easily crosses over into the world of harassment. But on the other hand, you have bullies who tend to actually know the people that they go after. Online trolls almost always don't personally know the people that they're attacking. Well, the bully is going to be bringing sort of personal details into the interaction in a way that a troll wouldn't necessarily. Although even there, it's hard to tell who is what, because a troll will often do a great amount of research to try to attack their target in the most personal way possible. So for the person who's being targeted, they may assume, they would think it has to be someone I know, because how do they know this about me? So it's so difficult, especially because you're dealing with anonymous actors. Sometimes it's impossible to know who's what.
You want to chime in there?
Oh yeah, just to chime in on the sort of complex and maybe partially legitimate motivations of some trolling, maybe the mild form. I mean, to some extent you can see it as a form of protest, a little bit like a heckler at a comedy club who thinks the comedy is so bad that it's not worth even engaging intelligently, but they just want to yell, you suck, so as to make it publicly known that, our standards should be higher. So you can feel that way about, online discussion or the way that politics is discussed, for example. And so to some extent, some kinds of trolling might be seen as a kind of protest to not engage on the terms in which the discussion is conducted, but to question those terms. And I think some of the trollers do see it that way. But on the other hand, and actually protest is something that we should value in a democratic society. Unfortunately, there's nowadays so much protest that's based on contempt of the opposition and sort of is uncivil. So it's a matter of sort of striking the balance between, reasonable and civil protest versus, and, just uncivil, harassment and things like that. So that's really the balance. But there can be a legitimate motivation behind it also in the milder forms.
You mentioned heckling, and Faith says, this is not killing anyone. At best, it can be comic relief, and at worst, it can be annoying. It's fairly easy to ignore. And there's a tweet here from Bangani who says, the internet is the ocean, and you are a ship on it. Its exposure is invaluable. Whether you get hurt depends on the thickness of your hull. So Zab Mustafa and Google+, I want to go to you. Is this about thickness of skin? Because you were targeted after writing about the Gaza-Israel conflict.
I don't think it is about growing a thick skin. As a journalist, you have to face a lot of criticism, a lot of different opinions, but the fact of the matter is this is online abuse, and I would go as far as to say cyberbullying. I mean, with me, personally, what happened was it started with a couple of abusers, just mildly saying mild abusive things, and it got so far as I had to inform the British police because a couple of Israeli individuals made up a fake account in my name and said a lot of racially abusive things towards Arabs, towards Islam, towards me, towards my background, which I did find very frightening as a girl. Online, everything's obviously public, but you can't go around bullying people like that online, especially from a fake profile. So the matter was taken into the hands of the police for me because it got so severe.
Aaron, should trolls be outed?
I think one big problem is that people who come across message board don't know what they're getting into. Like I can imagine my mom coming across, a message board to have an honest, open discussion about some idea she cares about, and then being attacked and thinking actually that this is sincere and that she's not being baited and having no way of understanding what's going on. So I mean, one thing that sites could do is just put up warnings to say, so people actually know what they're potentially getting into and know that they shouldn't necessarily take comments seriously and that they might be baited. And that would be something that, would be easy to do other than the other kinds of editorial functioning, like, kicking people off message boards and stuff. But I think they do need to do something to protect sort of innocent people from, stumbling into harassment. And it's not totally fair to just expect people to know, they're setting out on the seas and therefore they might get sunk.
Right. Layla chimes in here. She says, sometimes you come across a really persistent troll that will stop at nothing. The block button is easy, but so is creating a new account to torment your victim. I want to go to Milo now in our Google Plus Hangout. Milo is a journalist with the Colonel speaking to us from France. And Milo, you outed one of your tormentors.
Yes, I did. Actually, two things happened this week. The first was that I decided to reveal the identity of somebody who had been abusive to me, and the second is that I reported on a friend of mine, another journalist, who felt compelled to reveal his sexuality as a result of anonymous bullying as well. And these two things have led me to the conclusion I actually have no whatsoever for these protracted academic discussions about what the motivations of trolls are. These are vicious, violent, unpleasant people behaving in a way that is wholly unacceptable. So for that reason, I don't have much time for sort of hand-wringing discussions of what their motivations are. I'd like to know how they're going to be punished. And the good news is what I see happening in the British media certainly is an increasing intolerance and a zero tolerance policy growing. I see more journalists all the time completely unwilling to put up with this. And I think we're going to see a lot more outings in the media over the next 12 months. I think it can only be a good thing, because the more examples we make of people who choose to behave like this, whether they want to do it anonymously or under their own names, the better. And the better we educate people that when you publish something on a public platform, you must be held accountable for your actions as if you were saying it to them in a public forum.
Well, Milo, in an attempt to punish your troll, you wrote your piece, and then you actually were contacted by that person. Tell us what happened.
Yes, I was. He apologized. He asked me if I would take the piece down, actually. And I said, no, we don't do that. It's the sort of thing that, sloppy tech blogs do. We stand by our journalism. And if anybody's going to get him into trouble, it was his own actions that got him into trouble. The interesting thing in this case was he turned out to be a teacher in a school for autistic children. And he was making jokes in my direction about domestic abuse. I made a sort of personal revelation that perhaps I should have known better than to make on social media. But I didn't expect for someone to reply, maybe I should have, with hideous, mean-spirited jokes about abuse in a previous relationship of mine. And anyway, I looked into this guy, and unfortunately for him, not only are we journalists better equipped to do our research about people than they are, but we also have a much bigger platform should we choose to reveal wrongdoing. And I felt completely justified in doing it on this occasion. This person started under his own name and then tried to go anonymous. So I decided to draw attention to the fact that he was in a position of public responsibility and shouldn't be behaving that way.
So you tracked him down and you outed him. Michael Nelson, I want to go to you. You're a Georgetown professor here in D.C. of Internet Studies, and I know that you've been looking at effective ways of technologically blocking trolls. What do you see as a solution here?
Well, I've been working on the Internet for about 25 years, and over the years I've seen so many examples of where people are working together very effectively, sharing lots of useful conversations, hundreds of people, and then one troll, one abusive person gets in and disrupts everything. And so I think we're making progress. Social media is one step better because you usually attach somebody's comments to their photo and to their background and to their reputation. There are these anonymous sites, but I think people are shifting away from anonymous sites and going to places where they have a better sense that people can be tracked down. The next step, of course, is doing more things like we're doing right now. Google Hangout, where people are talking face to face. It's a lot harder for someone to be a troll when they're actually talking with their face in real time. I think in the end we're going to have some crazy people saying crazy things. It's just that more and more of us won't be hanging out in the same places they hang out. I also think we're moving to this transparent society that Milo was talking about, where it's much easier to find out who's saying something, much easier to injure someone's reputation if they behave badly, like so many trolls have. So I'm a technological optimist, but we're still working through this. It's going to take 5 or 10 years, and it's going to take some more innovative ways of building community online, I think.
Well, Whitney, there are questions here about how to do that without infringing on human rights, freedom of expression, as we mentioned in the beginning of the show. There's a video comment here. Have a listen.
I don't think that reducing online anonymity will impact online trolling. People who want to harm, hurt, or harass others will continue to find ways to do so, no matter what kind of obstacles we put in their path, and victims may find themselves just a little bit more exposed. And for me, the more important issue is that of freedom of expression. We need online anonymity in order to help us express stupid opinions, dissident opinions, and opinions that could leave us in trouble with future employers. Reducing that
cut off a little bit early, but reducing that, he says, would hurt freedom of expression. Whitney, do you want to chime in?
I find discussions about anonymity very interesting, and one of the assumptions that often goes hand in hand with this idea that if you reduce anonymity or somehow find a way to out all trolls, that abusive behavior is going to go down. Maybe that sort of trollish behavior where people are just, they find it fun to wind somebody up for whatever reason just because, they don't have anything better to do. Maybe those behaviors would be reduced. But the assumption that people are only awful anonymously is just not true. And in fact, you see a lot of terrible, horrible, racist, homophobic misogynist speech and behavior online that's right out in the open. People are perfectly capable of being terrible under their real names. And so I think that, reducing anonymity, it might help deal with certain behaviors, but the more endemic, pervasive bigotry that exists is going to continue, because that has absolutely nothing to do with anonymity. That is a real world problem that manifests itself online.
Aaron, you want to jump in on this one?
Oh yeah, I guess I want to make a plea for hand-wringing academic discussions to partly understand the different kinds of trolling and its motivations. And that's partly to know how to better strike a balance between protecting people against abuse and free speech. So partly understanding the different types of phenomena will know how best to address it. And of course, you're never going to be able to eliminate all abuse, but there's lots of different things that you can do to reduce it or improve speech. And there's not necessarily one sort of thing, one solution, but a lot of different measures that both increase speech and protect people, those kinds of things.
Does offline behavior drive what we see going on the internet, or the reverse of that?
I mean, it's a fascinating question. I think there is something about the medium itself that invites not just anonymity, but its impersonal character. I mean, as was suggested earlier, it's very difficult in face-to-face actions, face-to-face situations, to mistreat people blatantly, and that's partly because. And that's not because of lack of empathy.
There are consequences?
well, it's not even just that they'll yell at you. It's actually, there's a deep philosophical reasons that you, in appreciating their point of view, they're seeing you. You have an immediate sense that they think what you're doing is unacceptable in many cases, and so you immediately feel like you either have to apologize or explain, or this kind of basic moral moment, which is a basic part of our humanity, really. But then once you shift away to more impersonal contexts, like driving, for example, among cars, where you're relating to these objects, cars, and there are people in them, but you don't relate to them necessarily as persons as readily. Or you do think of it in moral terms, you're more inclined to think in terms of your rights or how they cut you off, and you don't think of them as people who have plans or going places. You think of your plans and where you're going, why it's really important for you to make your dental appointment or get home from work. And so the impersonal context sort of invites you to a certain way of kind of framing the situation in a way so you're more entitled. And so definitely in this kind of more impersonal form of speech communication on the message boards, where you're not necessarily talking to any one person, but to a lot of people, it's easier to see, to be farther away from sort of the face-to-face interaction, or to just really think that I'm talking to different people, as opposed to, it's easier to think of, you're talking to some kind of blob, impersonal blob.
Right.
And so that makes it easier to misbehave. Yeah.
Well, Maria here on Twitter has a solution. She says, trolls should be reported for trolling abuse. They should get a warning, and the second time, their account should be closed. Michael, I want to go back to you for the last comment. I'd like your thoughts on this anonymity and how to deal with it.
I want to say I certainly don't want to see anonymity outlawed like it is in some countries, but I think giving people a chance to know who they're talking to, and as Zab said, knowing that you can prove that an account someone makes up in your name isn't yours is equally important. But the other thing that matters here are the reputation engines that are being developed. There's an amazing tech site called Slashdot.com, and there are trolls that live there and make stupid comments, but the readers get to immediately vote on what they're reading, and the stupid comments get pushed off the page because the good comments get voted on and highlighted. So that's the other part of the puzzle here. I think the other way to solve this is to let the readers vote and provide immediate feedback so we can filter out the fools, filter out the trolls.
All right. That's a good place to end it in our online post show, which we're hoping you're all going to join us for. I want to talk about who's responsible. Is this the government that needs to crack down? Is it sites like Google and Twitter and Facebook? So we're going to jump into that in our post show that's going to begin in just about a minute. But for tomorrow's show, I want to give you a heads up on that. We're going to talk about something called killing for profit. It's the growing illegal wildlife trade, as government complacency and online anonymity fuel unprecedented levels of endangered species trafficking. So until then, we're going to see you online. Welcome back. This is the Streams Online Post Show. We're talking about internet trolling and how it relates to social behavior, both online and offline. I want to get back to the conversation. And Aaron James, I want to start with you. We were talking about responsibility. I mean, whose job is it to control the trolls? Is this a government regulation? Is this the responsibility of sites like Twitter and Google and Facebook? What do you think the best avenue is?
I mean, there is a certain responsibility on the part of people who have the website and run it to, they're already editing its content to some extent, so to edit the message boards and to, help keep, if the whole purpose of the thing is to create a, exchange of ideas and constructive discussion, and so certain amount of effort in, banning trolling or not, editing comments, or at least providing a function for the users to upvote or downvote, that seems like a basic responsibility. And not to mention things like warnings to unsuspecting, travelers who stumble into abuse and not knowing it. So I think those are responsible. Whether there's a bigger responsibility of government or something is a harder question about free speech regulation and stuff.
Start treading in that area. Got some tweets, Malik?
There is one, and this is an interesting one. It's a response to a tweet that I read a little bit earlier.
Okay.
He says, when you say thickness of your hull determines if you're hurt or not, in response to the tweet about you need thicker skin,
right.
I'd add that it's also dependent on the force of the attack, which is a good point. Zeb, on our Google Plus Hangout, I'd like you to chime in here. I know you also have a follow-up because you responded to the original tweet where you said it's not just about the thickness of your skin. Some of these are actually hateful and harmful.
I believe that there are different levels of abuse, but people shouldn't really undermine the severe cases. I mean, these are people that are setting out to target you as an individual, so that's a really important point. Again, going back to my experience, the procedure to report these to Twitter, I felt they don't take trolling serious enough. It's just very blasé about everything. And I think they should do more than just a box standard report the link. They should take further action and find out who these people are and try and take it from there, because obviously you cannot stop everyone on the internet, but you have to do something to make people feel safe. It's not a case of having thicker skin when people are racially abusing you, and that's what some of these abusive people do amount to.
Whitney, I want to get your thoughts on this, because some of this behavior online wouldn't be tolerated offline.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is the kind of thing that often people are expressing the sorts of things that they maybe will talk about in their living rooms, but know better than to talk about in the grocery store, for example. And so you it's not so much that the internet makes people mean necessarily, but it provides a forum for people to discuss more openly the things that they probably should know better than to say. And so, but that, again, that's not so much a function of the online space as it is the people who occupy that space.
And what are your thoughts on the solution here? We've discussed it a little bit here in studio.
The solution, that's very tricky. I mean, obviously you have the legal questions of what is the responsibility of government? What do they need to do? And how then do you organize that across national borders? Logistically, that's already a very complicated question. I do think that beyond the legal interventions that could or should take place, it's really important to think about the ways that trolling is in fact embedded in larger cultural systems. That, for example, you see a lot of trolling behaviors engaged in by mainstream media. So you see a lot of the kind of troll baiting that is typically just described to trolls and condemned, understandably and rightfully so. You see a lot of that on blogs, on various news sites, all over the place. And so I think that if we want to really think carefully about how to combat trolling behavior, where do we see similar or homologous behaviors in more mainstream circles? Where does this stuff come up beyond just, the anonymous spaces of the internet? I think that those are more difficult questions to address, but if you want to deal with trolling, you can't just deal with the symptoms. You have to deal with the underlying causes. And I think the underlying causes are much, much bigger than just anonymity or just people being jerks online.
Aaron, why don't you get into that a little bit, because that really gets more to a societal and cultural issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, at least arguably, there's deeper trends in the culture that suggest, might explain why people are more prone to sort of exploit the digital environment in this way. I mean, we should mention the media. to some extent already engaging in similar behaviors. But more and more, reality television, for example, encourages the idea that, the media is there for you to take advantage of, even if you're sort of throwing off, any sense of decency or propriety. And then there's a lot more incivility in politics generally, and much more of a sense that argument doesn't, can be made from contempt and doesn't require respect, and you can just disregard, fellow citizens and things like that. And then you might even tie it, I think there's a plausible connection between the larger culture of a kind of greed is good style capitalism, which we've come into recently, which suggests that society's there for you to take things from without being too worried about whether you're contributing. So the ethos of sort of you have a right to what you can get, and it's a kind of just a fierce competition for spoils, that those bigger ideas encourage interpreting the digital domain, especially when it's open to different interpretations, as something that can just be capitalized upon, especially when you've mastered the technology and have a certain command over things, and other people don't.
Yeah.
Well, there's one last question in our Google Plus Hangout from Katie, and Katie, of course, as a reminder, writes a beauty blog in Ireland. Katie, go ahead.
My question really is, how can people protect themselves online against the trolls? Is it the safest thing to just rise above it and ignore anon comments, or is this a trend that always has been around in digital culture?
So Whitney, applicable steps for how we protect ourselves from trolls.
Well, I think that the idea that, well, this is just how people are online and we need to just deal with it, I think that that's defeatist, and that just basically guarantees that the behaviors will continue. It's kind of similar to, explaining away sexual harassment, men sexually harassing women by saying, well, boys will be boys. As soon as you take that approach, it means that that sort of system of power will perpetuate itself. So I think that one way not to approach the issue is just to kind of shrug and say, it's fine. You need to just get a thicker skin, because some people aren't in the position to, some people don't have a very thick skin, and with very good reason, because they are consistently targeted. And that's another thing that's really important when you talk about trolling, is who is consistently targeted. It's typically not white dudes. It's often people who are maybe slightly more vulnerable, or who are historically targeted by the dominant group. And so I think that when you talk about trolling, you have to talk about power. Who has power, who does not, who exert power online, and who can't, who simply can't. And so I do think that although it's important to acknowledge the different kinds of trolling and to really try not to cast too wide a net when you condemn it or when you respond to it legally, it's also a manifestation of really of imbalanced power, and that's not okay. And that's where you have to start, is that some of this is just not okay, because it's historical. It's older than the internet, and it can be devastating to marginalized groups of people.
Oh, also just words themselves have power aside from the context in which they're used. If you're online and say my mother or me is called a whore, for example, then that means something, and even if the person who used the word didn't intend it to be taken seriously, it does mean something to somebody who understands it, and it's often too much to ask for us to just disregard that. Maybe you can learn to do it, and maybe the safest thing is to develop a thick skin, but that doesn't mean it's fair to expect people to do that just in order for them to benefit from the kind of communication involved.
We've got about 30 seconds left. Where does this go from here? How does this problem evolve into something that's solution oriented?
I suppose with increasing awareness, there'll be much more efforts taken by different websites to police. I think that's already happening, right, basically. So probably I'm guessing what will happen is certain kinds of solutions will become standardized. For example, more editorial control, but also upvoting and downvoting.
Lack of tolerance on the part of the public.
Just lack of tolerance there'll be less of a culture of tolerance about it, and more standardized means maybe more subscription, as was suggested earlier, based things to mitigate it, and maybe a little less anonymity and things. It also, and because the effect of the troll is so powerful, people just, it can squelch a free discussion very quickly, and so people will just naturally self-select out of those discussions and go to the more protected kind of shelter. So in a way, the trolls are hurting the cause of free speech, even if they say that they're celebrating it.
Well, our thanks to Aaron and Whitney and our Google Plus Hangout. Now, on Tuesday's show, we're going to look at the illegal wildlife trade and the internet's role in fueling unprecedented levels of trafficking. So send us your questions and your thoughts on that. And until then, we'll see you online.